Thailand building new trade bridges with Malaysia, regional development. What if I told you that two countries, separated by nothing more than a river, a fence, and decades of bureaucratic red tape, are about to pull off one of the most ambitious economic partnerships Southeast Asia has ever seen? And what if the ripple effects of that partnership are going to reach not just the traders, the politicians, and the investors, but the rice farmers, the street vendors, the single mothers running small shops, and the young entrepreneurs who've been waiting their whole lives for an opportunity like this? This is the story of Thailand and Malaysia, two neighbors who have always been close, but never quite close enough. And right now, something historic is happening between them. But wait, before we go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe so you never miss out on videos like this one. Comment "I subscribe" below, and I will personally welcome you to our community. With that said, let's get started. Here's a number that will stop you cold. Despite sharing over 600 kilometers of border, one of the longest shared land borders in Southeast Asia, Thailand and Malaysia are still operating their bilateral trade relationship at only about 60% of its real potential. That's according to the ASEAN Secretariat's 2022 trade report. 60%. Which means that almost half of what these two economies could be doing together, they're simply not doing. Billions of dollars. Just sitting on the table. Uncollected. And for decades, people on both sides of that border have felt it. Not as a number in a report, but as a lived reality. As frustration. As wasted hours. As missed opportunities. As trucks sitting in line for 6, 7, 8 hours at border checkpoints while fruit rots in the back and deadlines pass. Ahmad knows exactly what that feels like. Ahmad is a rubber trader from Kelantan, a state in northern Malaysia that sits right up against the Thai border. For 14 years, Ahmad drove the same route, crossed the same checkpoint, dealt with the same paperwork, the same delays, the same officials stamping the same forms. And every year, his profit margin got a little thinner. Not because rubber prices crashed. Not because his customers disappeared. But because the system, the slow, grinding, inefficient machine of cross-border trade, was eating him alive. He used to leave home at 3 in the morning just to get to the front of the queue by sunrise. He'd sit in that truck, sipping from a thermos of coffee that had gone cold, watching the sky turn from black to orange, listening to the engines of 100 other trucks idling in the dark. And he'd think, there has to be a better way. For Ahmad, for thousands of traders just like him on both sides of the border, and for two of Southeast Asia's most dynamic economies, there finally might be. Because right now, as you're watching this video, Thailand and Malaysia are in the process of laying the foundations for something that economic analysts are calling a potential game changer for the entire region. We're talking about new cross-border infrastructure, bridges, rail lines, special economic zones, digital trade corridors, backed by over $12 billion in planned investment between 2023 and 2030. $12 billion, flowing into one of the most strategically important corridors in the world. But here's what the headlines won't tell you. This isn't just a feel-good story about two friendly neighbors finally deciding to get along. There are geopolitical tensions simmering beneath the surface. There are communities being displaced. There are global superpowers watching this development with very, very careful eyes. And there are risks that could derail the whole thing if nobody's paying attention. So we're going to go deep on all of it today. The history, the infrastructure, the opportunity, and the real human stories that don't make it into the economic reports. Let's start where every good story about borders starts, with history. Because you cannot understand what's happening between Thailand and Malaysia today without understanding what happened over a century ago. In 1909, Britain and Siam, what we now call Thailand, sat down and drew a line. It was called the Bangkok Treaty, and it defined the modern border between what would become Malaysia and Thailand. But here's the thing about lines drawn by colonial powers in the early 20th century. They almost never line up neatly with the ethnic, cultural, and linguistic realities on the ground. And this border was no exception. The area straddling that border, the deep south of Thailand and the northern states of Malaysia, is home to a complex mix of Thai Buddhists, Malay Muslims, Chinese traders, and indigenous communities who have lived, intermarried, traded, and built families across what is now an international boundary for generations. The border cuts through communities that were never really separate. It separates people who speak the same language, eat the same food, and share the same ancestry. That cultural complexity has shaped everything about the Thailand-Malaysia relationship. The shared identity has created natural trade ties that are remarkably resilient. But the political tensions, particularly the ongoing low-level insurgency in Thailand's southernmost provinces, which has claimed over 7,000 lives since 2004 according to the Institute for Strategic and International Studies 2023 report, have also created a layer of instability that investors and policymakers are always quietly factoring in. That's when things got complicated. And honestly, they've stayed complicated ever since. But here's what's fascinating. Despite all of that, despite the historical baggage, despite the security challenges, despite the infrastructure gaps and the bureaucratic friction, trade between Thailand and Malaysia has never stopped growing. By 2022, bilateral trade hit $27.4 billion. That's not just two neighbors exchanging pleasantries. That is a serious, substantial, and deeply integrated economic relationship. And both governments have finally decided that if trade between them is already worth $27 billion at 60% capacity, what could it be worth at 100%? That question is driving everything that's happening right now. Let's talk about the infrastructure. Because this is where things get genuinely exciting, and where we can start to see the real shape of what Thailand and Malaysia are building together. The most visible piece of this puzzle is rail connectivity. For years, travelers and traders between the two countries have had to contend with a frustrating gap in the railway network, a disconnect between the Malaysian and Thai rail systems that forced passengers and cargo to transfer awkwardly at border stations. But under the new bilateral development framework, both countries are investing heavily in closing that gap and creating a seamless rail corridor that will eventually connect Kuala Lumpur to Bangkok with far less friction than ever before. Think about what that means for a moment. A connected rail corridor linking two of Southeast Asia's most dynamic cities, running through some of the region's most economically underdeveloped areas and bringing with it investment, jobs, and opportunity. The Asian Development Bank's 2023 Regional Cooperation Report estimates that full cross-border trade facilitation in this corridor could boost both economies by up to 18% over the next decade. 18%. That's not a rounding error. That's a transformation. And then there are the special economic zones. Both Thailand and Malaysia have been designating areas along their shared border as special economic zones. Basically, designated regions where businesses get tax breaks, regulatory relief, and streamlined customs procedures designed to attract investment and manufacturing. These zones are already starting to attract attention from manufacturers looking to build supply chains that span both countries, taking advantage of Thailand's strong industrial base and Malaysia's skilled workforce and financial infrastructure. Meet Nong. She's 34 years old, originally from Hat Yai, a bustling border city in southern Thailand that's long been a hub for cross-border commerce. A few years ago, Nong was running a small courier service, mostly moving documents and small packages between Hat Yai and Penang. The business was fine. It paid the bills. But when she started hearing about the new rail and logistics investments being planned for the corridor, something clicked. She pivoted. She registered her business as a cross-border logistics facilitator, invested in learning the new digital customs systems that both governments were rolling out, and positioned herself right at the intersection of what she could see was becoming a major new trade artery. It wasn't easy. There were months when she wondered if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. The new systems were clunky at first. The regulations kept shifting. There were weeks when nothing moved and she just sat in her office, staring at a spreadsheet that wasn't adding up. But then it started to work. Contracts came in. Small manufacturers who needed reliable cross-border logistics found her. Her team grew from 3 people to 11 in under a year. "I feel like I jumped onto a train just as it was leaving the station," she told a regional business magazine. "I don't know exactly where it's going, but I know it's going somewhere big." Now, here's where we have to pause and talk about something that the enthusiastic economic forecasts tend to gloss over. Because not everyone is jumping onto this train with the same sense of excitement. For every Nong who sees opportunity in the new infrastructure, there are communities who see disruption. Fishing villages along the coastline of southern Thailand who fear that new port development will displace their livelihoods. Farmers in northern Malaysia whose land is being eyed for logistics corridor development. Small traders who've built informal cross-border businesses over generations and are now worried that formalization and digitization will shut them out of markets they've always relied on. Progress, when you're on the receiving end of it rather than the leading edge of it, doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it just feels like loss. And this is one of the deepest tensions running through this entire story. How do you build a 21st century trade corridor without leaving 20th century communities behind? It's a question that both governments are being pushed to answer. Civil society groups on both sides of the border have been vocal about the need for community consultation, for benefit-sharing mechanisms, and for investment in the social infrastructure, schools, hospitals, housing, that needs to accompany economic development to make it sustainable. Because here's the thing, an economic zone without happy, healthy, educated workers isn't actually a good economic zone. The development has to work for people, or eventually, people will push back against the development. That's when things got really interesting. Because the conversation about what Thailand and Malaysia are building together stopped being just an economic story and started being something much bigger. Let me introduce you to Dr. Siti. Dr. Siti is a cardiologist. She runs a specialist clinic near the Malaysia-Thailand border, in a town that most outsiders would never think of as a medical hub. But over the past 5 years, something remarkable has been happening at her clinic. She's been seeing more and more patients from Thailand, not because she's been advertising across the border, but because word of mouth spread through the cross-border communities she serves that she was excellent, that her fees were reasonable by Thai standards, and that the quality of care was outstanding. What started as a trickle became a flow. And then the Malaysia Healthcare Travel Council caught wind of what was happening in border communities like hers and realized that this was an entire sector that had barely been tapped. According to the council's own data, medical tourism between Thailand and Malaysia grew by 34% between 2019 and 2023, and a significant portion of that growth was happening in exactly these kinds of informal, community-driven, cross-border healthcare relationships. Now, Dr. Siti is working with the local government to formalize and expand her operation. She's adding 2 new specialist doctors. She's building a small patient accommodation wing. And she's part of a pilot program that uses the new cross-border digital infrastructure to streamline medical records and referrals between Thai and Malaysian health systems. Nobody planned this, she said with a laugh. It just happened. Because people needed it and nobody was stopping them. That story of informal, organic, people-driven cross-border integration leading the formal infrastructure is actually one of the most hopeful signals in this entire development story. It suggests that the social foundations for deep Thailand-Malaysia integration aren't just possible. They already exist. The governments are in some ways just catching up to what people on the ground have been doing for decades. But we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Or more accurately, the dragon. Because no story about major infrastructure development in Southeast Asia in 2024 is complete without talking about China's role. China has been one of the most aggressive investors in Southeast Asian infrastructure over the past decade through its Belt and Road Initiative. And the Thailand-Malaysia corridor sits squarely within the geographic scope of what China considers strategically important, not least because it borders the Strait of Malacca, the narrow waterway through which an estimated $5.3 trillion worth of global trade passes every single year, according to World Bank 2022 data. When China invests in a port, or a rail line, or a special economic zone in this corridor, it's not just making a business decision. It's making a geopolitical move. And the United States, India, Japan, and Australia, all of whom have deep interests in keeping the Malacca Strait free and accessible, are watching every move very carefully. James spent 22 years as a diplomat in Southeast Asia. He's now retired, living in Penang, spending his mornings drinking teh tarik at a capitium near the waterfront and his afternoons writing long, thoughtful papers about regional geopolitics that most policymakers probably don't read carefully enough. James will tell you, over that second cup of teh tarik, that the Thailand-Malaysia Development Corridor is simultaneously one of the most exciting opportunities and one of the most fraught geopolitical pressure points in the region right now. The opportunity is real, he says. The growth potential, the infrastructure investment, the trade facilitation, all of that is real and significant. But both Thailand and Malaysia are navigating a very delicate balance between attracting Chinese investment and not becoming too dependent on it. Between engaging with the US-led economic frameworks and not alienating Beijing. It's diplomacy on a tightrope every single day. And both countries have been trying to walk that tightrope with notable skill. Malaysia's framework for regulating foreign investment in strategic infrastructure is among the most carefully calibrated in the region. Thailand has been deliberate about which projects it welcomes Chinese involvement in and which it keeps at arm's length. Neither country is naive about the game being played. But both are also acutely aware that they need investment from somewhere, and right now, no other player is showing up with a checkbook as large as China's. Now we're at the middle of this story, and I want to make sure you're hearing something crucial. Because this isn't just about governments and corporations and geopolitical strategy. This is about you. It's about the ordinary person watching this video who might be wondering, what does any of this actually mean for someone like me? Whether you're a small business owner, a young professional thinking about where to build your career, an investor looking at emerging markets, or just a curious person who wants to understand the forces shaping the world around them, the Thailand-Malaysia Development Corridor matters to you. Here's why. The ASEAN SME Policy Index 2022 found that cross-border small and medium enterprise trade in the Thai-Malaysian corridor grew 22% year-on-year between 2021 and 2022. That's in a period that included the tail end of a global pandemic. 22% growth in a challenging environment for a corridor that's still running at 60% of its potential. Now imagine what happens when the rail connections are complete. When the digital customs systems are fully operational, when the special economic zones are fully activated, when the healthcare corridors, the logistics networks, and the financial integration frameworks are all humming together, that 22% annual growth becomes something else entirely. And the people who position themselves now, the entrepreneurs like Nong who spot the trend early, the traders like Ahmad who learn the new systems before everyone else does, the professionals like Dr. Siti who build cross-border networks while others are still watching from the sidelines, those are the people who will look back in 10 years and say, I was there at the beginning. Remember Ahmad? The rubber trader from Kelantan who used to leave home at 3 a.m. just to beat the queue at the border checkpoint? His story didn't end with frustration. Ahmad spent 2 years learning the new digital customs clearance portal that Malaysia and Thailand rolled out as part of their bilateral trade facilitation agreement. He went to every workshop he could find. He dragged his nephew, who's better with computers, into the business as his technology partner. He reorganized his supply chain to take advantage of the faster clearance times. His costs dropped. His turnaround time cut in half. His income over the next 18 months tripled. His son is now studying international trade economics at a university in Kuala Lumpur. When Ahmad drove him to the bus station on the first day of the semester, they stopped at the same border checkpoint where Ahmad had spent so many cold, frustrating mornings over the years. And Ahmad looked at the new digital processing lanes and the reduced queues and he said to his son, "This is why you need to understand how trade works. Because when the system changes, the people who understand the change are the ones who win." That's the story of this corridor, really. It's a story about systems changing. About old barriers coming down and new opportunities opening up. About governments finally catching up to the economic reality that their people have been navigating for decades. About ordinary people, rubber traders and cardiologists and young logistics entrepreneurs, finding their footing in a rapidly shifting landscape. But let's not end the risk conversation too quickly. Because there are real, significant challenges that could slow down or even derail the Thailand-Malaysia development story, and pretending otherwise would be doing you a disservice. The security situation in Thailand's deep south remains a real concern. Over 7,000 incidents since 2004, according to the Institute for Strategic and International Studies. This isn't distant history, it's ongoing, affecting investment confidence, community safety, and every major infrastructure decision in the region. Any serious development plan has to confront that reality directly. Currency risk is another factor. The Thai baht and Malaysian ringgit have both seen periods of volatility. For cross-border businesses on thin margins, exchange rate swings can erase profits quickly. Without a unified currency or strong bilateral swap system, this risk remains constant for anyone operating across the border. There's also the challenge of political continuity. Projects of this scale take years, even decades. They span elections, leadership changes, and shifting priorities. What one government commits to, the next may delay or quietly shelve. Both countries have seen political transitions that introduce uncertainty into long-term planning. Whether commitment to this corridor can survive those shifts is still an open question. Then there's execution risk. $12 billion in planned investment sounds impressive, but planned and actual investment are very different. Designing, approving, funding, and building projects on time and within budget is a massive governance challenge. Many large-scale infrastructure efforts in developing economies have fallen short despite ambitious beginnings. So is the Thailand-Malaysia trade bridge a masterpiece or a mistake? The start of a regional renaissance, or an overreach heading for disappointment? The honest answer is, it depends. On political will. On whether local communities see enough benefit to keep supporting it. On geopolitical pressures, from China, the US, and global trade dynamics. And on whether the people building this corridor day by day, entrepreneurs, traders, doctors, logistics operators, keep showing up and doing the work. History often favors the optimists in stories like this. Not because optimism is always right, but because stagnation tends to produce worse outcomes. The world's most successful economic corridors, the Rhine-Ruhr in Europe, the Pearl River Delta in China, the I-95 corridor in the United States, were built over decades of sustained commitment, private initiative, and community adaptation. And in the Thailand-Malaysia corridor, you can already see those forces at work. Imperfectly, unevenly, with setbacks, but persistently and undeniably. Remember Nong's logistics startup? She just signed her first contract with a mid-sized Thai manufacturer routing goods through Malaysia to Europe. It's not huge, but it's real. Multiply that by thousands of similar deals, and it becomes transformational. Ahmad's son called him from Kuala Lumpur last week. He's studying ASEAN trade frameworks and told his father that many of his case studies focus on developments in the very corridor their family has traded in for generations. Ahmad laughed and said, "You don't need a textbook. Come home and I'll show you." And Dr. Siti recently got approval to expand her clinic. 2 new specialists are joining, and she's hiring a bilingual coordinator. She's also in talks with a Thai hospital for a cross-border referral partnership, something that would have been nearly impossible to manage just a few years ago. These are small, individual stories, but they're the threads of larger transformation. They prove that what policy papers and investment plans promise is already taking shape in real life. One bridge at a time. One rail line. One digital customs system. One deal. One entrepreneur. One community at a time. Southeast Asia is changing. Global trade is being redrawn. And at the center of it, in the complex borderlands between Thailand and Malaysia, something lasting is being built. The question isn't whether it will happen. It already is. The real question is who will be part of it. And that brings me to you. I don't want this to be just a video you watched and forgot. I want it to be a conversation. Thailand and Malaysia are building trade bridges that could reshape Southeast Asia. But history shows that when major corridors open, benefits aren't always shared equally. Sometimes large corporations capture most of the gains, while small businesses get left behind. So here's my question. Do you think small businesses and local entrepreneurs will truly benefit from this corridor, or will big corporations and foreign investors take most of the gains? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every comment and reply to as many as I can. And if this video gave you something valuable, a new idea, a fresh perspective, share it with someone who would care about this topic. Not for views, but because this conversation matters. The story of Thailand and Malaysia building new bridges, literal and figurative, is about what happens when cooperation beats competition. It's about ordinary people creating opportunities before systems are perfect. And it's a story still being written, right now, in the checkpoints, corridors, clinics, startups, and communities of one of the most important border regions in the world. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.